Welcome to the Bias Buzz. I'm Don Irvine. He's Brian McNichol.
Good morning.
All right, there is a lot of news, things that happen when you only do the show once a week, I guess. Let's just start off right off the bat with the Dallas police shootings. A tragic event at the end of last week has created quite a firestorm, obviously, around the country. What's your thoughts on this, Brian?
You have people who are starting to take the cop-hating, cop-killing rhetoric seriously. You know, it's one thing there's always been people who talked about things like this, but I mean, there's at least a life prison sentence at the end of it, if not, worse, because, the cops rarely, if you kill cops, you rarely make it to trial, right? So these are essentially jihadists. These are essentially, what they call, shaheed or martyrs in the Middle East. They're, people who are willing to die to cause mayhem and chaos. That's a new thing in this country. We have to think about why that is and what's going on. It also strikes me, and it's like, I'm not blaming Obama, but at the end of every Democratic administration, there's this dystopic just desolation in the country. Carter talked about a national malaise, and I think we're going back there, and I think it's this time, it's all on social media. The news is much more covered and so forth. So it's all magnified. We all see this all in real time. But I think that's where we're going. It's just general unhappiness with what's going on in the country.
Right, and a lot of this, this kind of disseminated out of, there was a peaceful protest going on in Dallas about the shootings that were happening, that had happened with officers killing black men, which always, you just kind of get this knee-jerk reaction. And you mentioned social media. Social media helps fan the flames for this. Definitely doesn't help the situation when you have all this. It just kind of snowballs and develops like this. But in this case, this was a young black man who went out and he shot 5 police officers in Dallas, including one of the officers was a transit officer, right. Which I continue to think, what a tragedy. It's a tragedy losing any law enforcement officer. But, if you're a transit officer, it's one of the last things you really expect is that your life is going to be on the line, that some crazy's going to come out there and do that. And the way the police, took this guy out by using this robot, that was an unusual situation, but they had to do something.
Yeah, that's another conversation that needs to be had at some days. Like, do we want... The government now has drones that can fly over us and kill us, robots that can just send something into our house and blow us up. It's this guy. He was obviously the guy doing the shooting, and he obviously had done horrible things, right? But what about if it's a truly political situation where you really haven't killed anybody? You could see. It's a slippery slope and that type of thing. If you have that type of capability, it's going to start getting used in non-obvious situations.
Right, and I still want to go back in even on these shootings with how a lot of this emotion, this furor developed, is that you had this Philando Castile. It was his girlfriend that was she shot everything on Facebook Live, and so you get this raw footage, but it's not necessarily in context with everything else that's going on. You learn things later, but once again, going back to my thing, it's a knee-jerk reaction. You see this, it fans the flames, people get all upset, and there's no context to this.
Well, the thing about that video is, it starts, the parts what I saw. You don't actually see the guy being shot. You don't actually see the incident that leads to it. You see her saying what happened after it happened. Now, maybe it's completely accurate, right? Maybe that she presented it exactly as it was, but you don't know that. And, she's obviously in a highly emotional state, and she obviously has an agenda too, right?
Yeah, so she's issued kind of a post-shooting commentary on Facebook Live to fuel whatever out there and just say, this is another terrible incident, terrible tragedy, should never have happened. But we don't know. When you look at it, Black Lives Matter, which I want to talk about a little bit, is that it develops in Ferguson, Missouri, as a result of Michael Brown being shot, and this whole hands up, don't shoot kind of a thing, which was a false narrative. I mean, everybody bought into it, but it wasn't true in the end. You know, the Obama's Justice Department even came back and talked about what had happened there.
Well, here's the thing about that. Okay, all these things, you know, was Michael Brown a nice person? Probably not, right? He had took some cigars earlier in the day, told the people he wasn't going to pay for them, stomped out of the store. Nice people don't really do that, right? I've never done that. You know, Castile, is he a nice guy? You know, we're beginning to find out, maybe not completely, right? Sterling in Baton Rouge, is he a nice guy? Long record of arrests, some for pretty serious crimes, done some serious time in prison. Okay, so they're not choir boys. But what happens is we get these shootings and we go out and dig up the dirt on these guys, which inflames the folks on the other side, and you know, to try to add this context. But what they see is, and it's also a legitimate thing, is could Castillo, Sterling, Michael Brown, Garner in New York have been brought in without shooting them? And the answer in almost all those cases is probably so, right? Which the police have to look at. It's like, oh, it was a struggle. We saw the top of his gun. I mean, come on, guys. You have 3 people holding him down. You know, shooting him first was not our choice. So there's work to be done on both sides. And,
right.
you know,
I think that's right. I mean,
that.
I'm not here to just go and blankly absolve the police of this, but you know, the reaction that we've had has been pretty severe, and it goes into that whole, you know, we've got this thing, as you were talking about earlier. I mean, you know, we have this whole race issue, you know, comes front and center, and Obama goes down to Dallas for the memorial service, and it comes up, and then he makes a statement about, you know, what was it? It's easier for teens to get guns than books and computers, and
Right,
I'm like,
is,
where's that argument?
Yeah.
Who in the heck comes up with that argument except someone like Obama and the liberals? You know?
Yeah. One of the real tragedies that has happened in this, and it's been going on for 7.5 years now, is he's on the wrong side of this stuff every time. He was on the wrong side of Gates, you know, going back to the beer summit. You know, he just, it was totally unfair to treat this guy this way. It's like, well, you know, their policy says if, you know, they get this call, this is how they handle it. They show up, there's a guy walking around in a house who, you know, he broke in the house. It was his house, but you don't know that as the cop driving up on the scene. So then it comes out, okay, maybe what this cop did was not all that bad. Now, do you ever hear Obama go back and say, hey, I got that wrong? No, you do not, right? He made his decision. He cast the cop in a bad light. He made it about racial discrimination. You know, one thing I think, you know, a lot of people voted for Obama to get past this problem. And the problem has gotten worse, and he has no one to blame for that but himself.
Right, and I think that's absolutely true. That, you know, he came in kind of as this uniter. I mean, saying that Bush had divided the country, and we had to fix this. And, you know, really, as the first black president, he was the guy who could do this. He could heal this country. He could bring us together. But I think we're further apart than we've ever been as a result of his presidency. His policies have just driven. There is so much polarization. I cannot remember ever seeing this in my lifetime, of someone who has driven this wedge so squarely down the middle in this country and has put us on in this situation. You look at social media, you look at a lot of other things. We are very, very divided, which is unfortunate.
Right, and it's, you know, it's in large measure the thing that people talked about when he ran for office in 2008, which is he's in over his head. You know, when he became president, he was 6 years. He had been in public office for 6 years. You know, 4 in the Illinois State Senate, 2 in the U.S. Senate. Okay, so he had virtually no experience for this. You know, and he's been in over his head ever since.
Yeah. All right. Well, also relating to all of this and Black Lives Matter is, you know, former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani coming out and, you know, chastising Black Lives Matter and calling them, you know, a racist organization. And, you know, that's definitely attracted a lot of attention with that. There's been a lot of argument on both sides about that. But by and large, I mean, I think, you know, Rudy was trying to make a statement saying, look, Black Lives Matter is not what you think it is. It's not really a peace-loving organization. We've talked about what's on their website. Accuracy Media is going to be doing more on this. We've got a special report coming out on Black Lives Matter. We actually have a website going up called Black Lives Matter Exposed that'll be launching very soon. There's a lot more to this when you start digging down and digging behind it than this organization that supposedly is just trying to heal things. They get involved. I mean, it starts with Michael Brown, and we have Freddie Gray. We have all of these things that are just kind of roll up, and then they add to this. It's kind of a mess. I don't know if it was necessary for Rudy to go out there and say it's racist, but it definitely got a lot of attention.
Well, so in Baton Rouge, someone put up on the web, where are the people who got arrested in those protests, where are they from? And, most of them are from Baton Rouge or New Orleans or so forth. But a lot of them were from elsewhere in the country. And what the sentiment on the ground there is, I know a lot of people live there, my family there and so forth, is that there is a need, there are a bulk of people who want to protest this and make their views known about police treatment, and it's not just Sterling. There's a long record in Baton Rouge of problems along these lines. But the trouble is being made by these outsiders, by Black Lives Matter people who travel around the country starting trouble, basically. They start fights, they get arrested, and since it's, minor battery and, they're not going to spend a lot of law enforcement resources on imprisoning them and stopping them from doing it. So they do it here and they move on. They do it there and they move on. And they're all in these things, and they're the ones making trouble. For instance, in Baton Rouge, you see there's the picture of the girl. She's dressed in her summer dress, and there's a bunch of riot cops in front of her. And it's like, oh, the riot cops beating up on this poor girl. It's also where McKesson, the head of it, got arrested. Is they're walking along Airline Drive or Airline Highway in Baton Rouge, and they're walking toward I-12, which is a major thoroughfare, which it goes across the north side of Lake Pontchartrain and serves a lot of the Baton Rouge, New Orleans area. And they wanted to go block the highway, and the cops let them protest. They let them do what they wanted to do until they got ready to block highways. And then they said, this is an interstate highway, it's not safe to let you up there, and that's what they went and stopped. And all that was outside people agitating otherwise peaceful demonstrators.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was going to say, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, did you ever think when we started this podcast we'd talk so much about Baton Rouge and Louisiana?
Yeah.
I didn't know I was going to have a ready-made expert coming in on this thing. That's great. It helps the podcast, I think, a lot. Another thing relating to all of these Black Lives Matter, another fallout, is the police officers in Minnesota who walked out of the Minnesota the Lynx game, the WNBA game, because the players showed up in pregame wearing Black Lives Matter shirts, T-shirts, and whatnot. And one of the things I found that surprising with this was just that the police union had backed them up, and there was apparently a list that developed where several of the other officers on the force up there are saying, we're not going to go and work these games, and that's kind of a moonlighting, separate type of thing. They're not doing that as official police duty. They're working the game as security. What do you think about that?
Well, might keep going on because the team said, we support our players expressing their views, so forth. But I mean, the fans can decide. Do you want to go to a game where there's no security? WNBA makes the news. That's good for the WNBA.
They don't get a lot of news otherwise.
It's, their 20th year, and they haven't made a profit and probably never will. But it's good. I'm glad it's there. And it's good basketball, and I watch it sometimes. But this conflict is not going to go away. The players are kind of dug in. The cops are kind of dug in, and. I don't know. I mean, if you're private, you're not in the performance of your public duties, you have a right to not do a job. I don't work at Burger King. No one can make me.
Right. Yeah. So I think you're right about that too. I think that'll go on, and and who knows? I mean, the Black Lives Matter type of thing. That demonstration, that kind of protest may spread to other teams as well. tends not to be always that isolated. That usually someone else says, "Oh, we can do that too." We've seen this in the sports field already before with the NFL and things like that. They've done this stuff in the past. Athletes, commenting and doing this. I mean, they're completely out of their league. They have no understanding. It's there once again. My terminology, knee-jerk reaction to all of this gets them. They think they need to comment on this.
I was a sports writer for 27 years, and one thing I can tell you is the sports media does not understand politics, public policy at all. There are virtually nobody in America who can write knowledgeably about sports and politics. I mean, you can fill those guys in a phone booth.
Yeah, look, if you're going to write sports, write about sports. Stick to your knitting.
Right.
Don't get into the politics of it.
They don't understand. They're knee jerk. It's like when they were building Nats Park. Sports Illustrated, Chris Ballard came out with a story. How can you spend money on a baseball stadium when the school system needs books? Okay, well, Nats Park was built with a special tax on the biggest 200 businesses in Washington. They agreed to the tax because they wanted to build a baseball stadium. They would have fought that tax, and it never would have been passed if it were to, buy more books for the school system. So that's not money that was available to the school system. But, and everyone in Washington knew that. But this guy, he's totally offended by it. It's still one of the dumbest things I've ever read.
Yeah, and I think, I've seen pieces like that time and time again where sports writers have delved into the political field talking about things like that, the financing. It's like, well, why isn't the money available for these things? But they don't understand. The money wasn't going to be there for those things. The money was specifically earmarked for the sporting event or for this particular thing. You can't go and just do the other thing. They think it's all fungible. You can just move those around. Well, and that's not going to happen. There are certain things that happen. There'll be bonds that'll be issued for a specific purpose and things like that. So those are very specific things, and you're right. They don't have any understanding of that at all.
And right, and plus the knee-jerk reaction that the problem with DC schools is more money. You have to be a lefty to think that. Because they spend far more money per student, like a third more money per student than Fairfax or Montgomery. Why is Fairfax and Montgomery among the best school systems in the nation, and they're among the worst? It's not money. They're the ones with the money.
Right. All right. Well, yesterday we also had Bernie Sanders coming out and finally endorsing Hillary. It was a little bit of a painful thing to watch. It was hard, I think, for Bernie to go and actually do that, and it wasn't necessarily the most ringing endorsement or heartfelt type of thing. There were Sanders protesters there, or people there that left kind of crying in tears and things like that. They were disappointed that Bernie had given up on the whole thing. No guarantee that even with that endorsement that the Sanders people are going to vote for Hillary either.
Well, I think we said earlier that up to as many as a third of Bernie's voters we're talking about walking at that point. I think that number's down. It's probably below 20 now. They're coalescing around her. I think the big news about Bernie endorsing her is the trouble that they plan to make at the convention in Philadelphia probably won't happen. Those resources, all the people that, a lot of the people in Baton Rouge were headed to Cleveland. That was their next place to go. They have buses for nearly 10,000 people now, and another 15 to 20,000 people who plan to drive there to participate in protests in Cleveland. The idea is to overwhelm the police and crash the convention and not allow Trump to even be nominated, which I think, the Democrats should make sure that Trump is nominated. They should go secure the hall to ensure this happens. But, that's where it is right now.
Yeah, and I guess this means it's the official end of the Bernie Bros.
That's what I'm saying. They may not.
Yeah.
They're going to, instead of attacking fellow Democrats, they're going to turn their,
to
they've got them mad at the Republicans now.
But if you don't have Bernie Bros, what do you have? Hillary Sisters or something like that? I don't know. I mean, there was this poll, and it was discussed on MSNBC yesterday too, about where Clinton stands with young voters, which was Sanders' strength.
Right.
He really did a great job with the young voters. And this poll, which was not taken by a conservative organization, showed that the 18 to 30s 54% disapproval, didn't trust Hillary Clinton. And then when they broke that down, 68% of that group, those were the young white voters, and 42% were the Hispanic voters, 38% Asians. She did better with blacks, but Obama overall his approval rating, this favorability was 66% in his 2 elections. Hillary's got a huge problem there in terms of attracting voters. And I thought one of the interesting comments I saw yesterday was from Katty Kay, who appears on MSNBC, and she works for BBC, and she said she'd spent the month of June talking to young women, and they say that they just find that Hillary is old news, not necessarily by age, but there's nothing new about Hillary, and I think that's also an underlying problem for Hillary.
Right. I think people are looking for it to be shaken up one way or the other, and she represents incremental change. This is not going to be, if you look at what's going around the world, Brexit and all these other things in the Middle East and so forth, people are not looking for incremental change. They're looking for transformative change, and that's not her.
Yeah, and I think Rush had it right. I was listening to a little bit of his program, and he's talking about Hillary and her speech, and one of the things that she had said was talking about the investment, this huge jobs program, going to get jobs, and I think Rush was right when he said, "Wait a minute, if she knows the secret for the jobs, which have not been terribly in good numerous under Obama, why don't they just talk about it now? I mean, why don't they tell us what it is? Why don't they go ahead and do it now? Why has she got to wait till November and things like that? They don't really. Those are broad strokes. There's not really going to be an answer. She's going to make these promises, but it's incremental, and in the end, she's not going to be able to meet those promises.
That's right. And the other thing about you mentioned jobs. So in May, the May jobs report said that they had added 275,000 jobs. When the June jobs report came out, it adjusts the May figures down to 11,000 jobs. 11,000 jobs in the whole country. That's what, about 220 per state or something like that. I mean, that's not, you're not getting it done there, right?
Yeah, I mean, Obama has not been able to manage the change in the economy and the way the economy works now, and he's disappointed a lot of the young voters. I mean, I think that's part of the problem for Hillary too. Is just that the young voters have been severely disappointed with all the promises that Obama made for them. She's trying to woo them back now by taking on the Bernie Sanders mantle of, we're going to give you the free education type of thing. But but that's not a costless thing for the taxpayer. So somebody's got to pay for that.
I think most people have realized that that's unaffordable and won't really happen. And they may reduce. They may have a level of community college you can do for free or nearly free. But that's not really the problem. Money does not keep very many people out of school. It's a myth that there's like millions of people who would go to college if only they had the money.
Sounds a little bit like Obamacare.
Right. Another collapsing myth. That was a huge societal problem that had to be addressed. And it's like, so we've layered over this huge bureaucracy. We've spent billions of dollars on exchanges that have failed. It's one of the worst public policy gaffes ever. And you've reduced uninsured by what, 2 million, something like that. The net people who got insurance, Ed Hazelmeyer Heritage Foundation says that if you say all the people who were knocked off their health insurance, okay, and all the people who got coverage back through Obamacare, the amount of people who actually got coverage because of Obamacare is like 250,000 people in the whole country. So again, what's that, 500 people a state, or 5,000 people a state, right?
Yeah,
that's not.
It's a drop. It's a drop in the bucket for everything that goes on, and right. and exchanges have continued to fail, and we're down to like 7 co-ops or whatever. I mean, right. It's just they're teetering. I mean, insurance companies lost a lot of money.
They all won out.
They won out. I mean, and now we hear this talk about public option, which it's just going right.
Yeah.
And I mean, the whole thing is a disaster, and it's only getting worse. Right. Let's quickly try to talk about a couple other things too. RNC convention, you mentioned a little bit about it. What do you expect to see out of that in general?
Well, they supposedly are close to having enough votes to upend people who don't want to vote for Trump, who may or may not be bound to vote for Trump, to try to push somebody else forward. What's not clear is who that someone would be. I don't hear anyone say Cruz, who was clearly second, right? So then if you go past the second most wanted person, who do you go to and why? So I think at the end of the day, and I think the Chairman Priebus has realized this, their best bet is Trump.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Also, quickly before we go on to our 2-minute warning here, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg made some very strong comments about Trump. I think she really crossed the line here, and I think that several members of the liberal media are in agreement that, she's now politicized the court and shouldn't have done that.
I don't see how if I was a Republican bringing a case to the Supreme Court, or my client was Republican, I would ask for her recusal every single time, because you've said I can't be fair to Republicans.
How do you argue a case before that? And you know exactly how she feels. She's made these feelings very strong.
I think she went over the line there.
Yeah, and I think she's predicting kind of a Clinton victory, but it was kind of hedging her bets just to remind fellow liberals that if Hillary doesn't get in, I don't know what's going to happen to the Supreme Court, in the next 4 to 8 years otherwise. But, if Clinton gets in, you're talking 20, 25 years maybe of dominance of the liberals and changing a lot of things going on out there. All right. I do need to mention Pokemon Go just because this is the craziest phenomenon I've seen lately. And there was a story that Arlington National Cemetery and the Holocaust Museum are making a request for people, please don't go there to go search for the Pokemon monsters or whatever they are. You have younger kids. I don't get this, but...
Well, my kids, they're not interested.
Good.
I love them to death. They don't seem interested in it. It is one of those things. Like a week ago, I'd never heard of it, and now it has swept the nation. That's another example of when we say Trump is down in the polls or whatever, the speed at which all that can change, right? Because this was nothing last week, and now it's everywhere.
Yeah, to me, even reasonably minded people are playing it. People I know on social media, and I'm like, okay, whatever. Go ahead and do it.
I'm a little busy today.
Yeah, I've got a few other things I need to take care of. All right, 2-minute warning. Your turn.
The American League beat the National League last night in the baseball All-Star game. Baseball is the only sport can really do an All-Star game right. You're not going to go throw a 70-mile-an-hour fastball. You throw your regular fastball. The guy's got to swing just as hard. Football All-Star game is don't get hurt. Basketball All-Star game is don't play defense. Hockey's the same way. But it was a great game last night. The American League has won. You realize it's been 14 years now that the All-Star game is counted towards who has home field advantage in the World Series. The American League has won 11 of the 14.
And that's an important distinction for that.
It is. It mattered last year.
Yeah, and even though we don't compare notes before this, mine is also about the All-Star game, but it's about the pregame. And I want to commend Major League Baseball for what they did last night by naming their batting champion awards for the American League after Rod Carew and the National League after Tony Gwynn. Two of the best hitters that in my lifetime, really, of watching baseball. And I really think that's a great honor for that. And I think the players that win that will be very proud of that. The awards, Tony Gwynn unfortunately died prematurely. He had cancer, too much tobacco chewing there. But, these were two great ball players. I'm glad that they're getting some real recognition here. It's something that will last a lifetime.
Yeah, Gwynn, a huge citizen in San Diego, too, where the game was.
It was perfect for that. And so that's it. Thanks for joining us today for the Bias Buzz. And until next week, we'll see you again.